Please rewind this cassette.
Okay, guys, here's a very, 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 very late review for Toy Story 4. Like, holy shit, why am I doing a review this late for Toy Story 4? It's almost like it's pointless for me to do this review right now. But here it is anyway. I love the Toy Story franchise. I know that there's some people out there that think it's overrated or it just has this attachment to millennials who saw the original Toy Story when it came out in 95. And there's probably some truth to that. I can't deny that. I saw Toy Story when it came out and I was a kid, and I've loved the characters ever since. The argument I would make to that, though, is that in a lot of ways, Toy Story was like a Star Wars moment for kids growing up in the 90s, in the fact that it was the first time we saw a CG animated film or an entire film made in a computer. And I remember seeing the original Toy Story in the theater, and that's all anyone talked about when they walked out was like, oh my god. Go back and watch Siskel and Ebert's review for the movie. They don't even talk about the story or characters. They just talk about the animation. So in that sense, so of course everyone has this reverence for Toy Story. One thing though that I think people don't give Toy Story enough credit for is thematic depth. I know there's a criticism that each Toy Story film is a remake of the previous film and they just repeat themselves. And I know it's become trendy to hate on Toy Story 3. Your movie sucks did a whole video on it being horrible. Chris Ray Gunn tweeted out about it. I've seen a lot of people talk about it, that Toy Story 3 is really overrated. It's just a remake of Toy Story 2, so thus it's bad because it has similar elements. Even though every sequel just about ever copies story beats, even visuals, and all sorts of things. I mean, Terminator 2 is just Terminator 1 with a bigger budget. Even The Godfather Part 2, the greatest sequel ever, has so many things that come from the original film. But to simplify it, I would say Toy Story 1 is about self-realization. It's becoming aware of your existence. Terry Gilliam sort of talks about that when he talked about Toy Story being one of the greatest animated films. It was when Buzz Lightyear comes to terms with the fact that he's a toy. I would say Toy Story 2 is about legacy, and Toy Story 3 is about the acceptance of death. Now, here we are 9 years later, and a lot of people didn't want a sequel to Toy Story, myself included. John Lasseter was involved, but for obvious reasons, he left the project, and then Rashida Jones and her writing partner worked on the movie, although she left at one point. This was a troubled production. John Lasseter was supposed to direct this movie, and now it's directed by Josh Cooley, and Toy Story 3 was done by Lee Unrich, who had worked on the previous films and also directed Coco after that movie came out. My favorite of the franchise is either 2 or 3, even though I think 1's, the classic. I get what people mean in the fact that Toy Story 3 is a lot of familiar beats, but then it has that last 25 minutes, which is great, although some people find it ridiculous. Toy Story 4 is a weird one. It's, in many ways, the saddest film of the franchise. The whole film has this melancholy to it. It's got the least amount of screen time for the supporting characters. This is totally about Woody. Buzz isn't even in this very much. I mean, there's really no Rex, no Mr. Potato Head, no Slinky for the majority of this film. It's a Woody story, which I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting a lot of things about this movie. I don't really know how to react to it. This film is about looking for one's purpose. And then at the end, I almost felt like the movie was saying something about searching for your purpose is borderline meaningless, that there is no purpose. You don't have a greater purpose. You're not the hero to a story, that life just goes on without you. And there's something about that this film is saying that not only as kids have we grown up with the Toy Story franchise, but the franchise itself has also been growing this whole time and becoming more mature. I actually think this is the most mature film in the franchise in a lot of ways. I don't think this is a kiddie film. So the film starts with a flashback that takes place at night as opposed to the daytime of the other films with the camera coming down from the sky. This one starts with a flashback with what happened to Bo Peep 9 years previously. Really like this opening scene. Really like the scene with the parents taking Bonnie, who Andy gave the toys to kindergarten, which is this thing about letting go. And I thought that was going to be a theme of the movie, but they didn't really go into that very much. A little bit with Woody. But then there's a really fascinating thing. Well, Bonnie creates a friend at school. She makes Forky out of a fork and some string and stuff like that. And then this brings Forky to life. So this movie opens up new existential ideas in the Toy Story franchise that people can create things and thus they become alive after their creation. This is also the first film to have horror elements the way it does. Other films have been scary, Sid's Room, but that the toys actually there's a fantasy sequence where the toys attack people. So it's almost like, wait, is this going to be like a toy uprising story, or is a toy going to reveal itself? Phrasing to a character. I honestly thought this was going to end with Woody telling Bonnie, that he has consciousness, that he can speak to her. That's where I thought the movie was going. Anyway, we cut to years later. Woody's not being played with by Bonnie. He's not her favorite toy. She actually liked Jessie a lot more. He misses Andy, but he makes it his job to take care of Forky, who keeps trying to commit suicide basically by jumping into a trash can because he shouldn't exist. He's aware of the fact that he shouldn't be real. So then they go on a road trip in this RV. They end up at a carnival, and then Forky and Woody get tied up in all this stuff, and they end up in this antique store. And the majority of this movie takes place in this antique store, in the same way that Toy Story 3 took place in the daycare. Toy Story 2 was at the collector's house. Toy Story 1, most of it was in Andy's room. This film is, the majority of it, it's honestly a small scale film. This isn't an epic adventure movie. It's very much in this antique store and spends time developing new characters. We get Duke Kaboom, played by Keanu Reeves. We get a lot more time with Bo Peep. She's as much of a main character as Woody. We meet some stuffed animals voiced by Key and Peele. Gabby, I think Gabby's her name. Christina Hendricks does a voice of her. At the beginning, she feels exactly like Lotso, and beyond that, she also seems like the villain from the second film, which was also Lotso. Once again, this franchise repeats itself. Trust me, people. There's a sequence in this where they have to break somebody out. There's actually a few sequences of that in this movie, which is once again a staple of the franchise. I don't see those as negatives, though. I like the staples. What changed my mind on Toy Story 4 is that with a friend, we were watching the short films that had come out, like Toy Story of Terror, and I loved all of them. And I'd said to him, maybe it's not a problem to make sequels. Yes, the original trilogy seems so tight, but these characters are so good. It's like you can just continue stories with them and put them in any situation and it works. And I feel like this film justifies that. This is a separate film. This doesn't feel like a continuation necessarily, or even an epilogue to the original trilogy. This feels like the start of something new, and that there'll be a Toy Story 5 and 6. In a lot of ways, this is going to be disappointing for most people out there, I think. I think this is going to be disappointing in that it doesn't hit the emotional highs of 3, and it doesn't really do anything new in the franchise. But for me, what I liked about it was that it solidified in many ways that that Pixar in general, what they have done is created kind of a tone and a storytelling rhythm that I think was very influenced by Ghibli, and I think this film is a testament to that. This before this movie even started, there was all these trailers for these films coming out, like Angry Birds 2 and Trolls 2, or this fucking stupid ass movie where Will Smith is a spy and he gets turned into a fucking pigeon. All of them looked awful. They all looked like awful kids films. Then actually watching this film, I was like, oh wow, yeah. Wait, animated films can be great. And I'm talking in an American context. Like, they're not just for 5-year-olds. They don't just have stupid jokes. And the celebrity voice acting being so cringy and obvious. Tom Hanks gives a great performance as Woody. Disappointed with the lack of buzz, though, even though they have this running gag within her voice. So Gabby, or Gabby Gab, whatever the fuck her name is, the chick with the big boobs from Mad Men, let's just call her that. You think she's kind of the villain, but the movie turns that on its head. She wants the Woody string in his voice box because hers is broken, and she thinks if she gets his voice box, she's going to get taken out of the antique store. The movie surprised me with that. It doesn't go negative in a lot of ways. And Duke Kaboom is great because he's like that Evil Knievel toy that never worked, so the kid gave him away because he couldn't make the jump, so he misses this kid, and he has like he gets triggered. He has like PTSD about this kid giving him away. All this stuff though you've kind of seen before. I'm not gonna act like any of it's new. This is probably the weakest Toy Story film, I think, but it's still a good movie. Like the other films, I would give a 9 or a 10. This is like an 8 out of 10. So it's hard to be negative on it. Like, I want to say, wow, this was so disappointing and I didn't love it like I thought I was going to. But the more I've been away from it, I've had a lot of time to think about it. I do think this is a rich movie. And this has to be said. This is the best looking animated film I've ever seen, at least computer animated film. The lighting in this movie, which I just don't think 2D animated films can compete with, especially lighting as happened the last few years with special effects and CG in general. They've kind of figured out lighting, which was the big issue predominantly in the 90s and the early 2000s. This has the best lighting I've ever seen in an animated film. This antique store, the whole thing looks real. Even the toys look real. It kind of made it creepier, losing some of its cartoon vibes. Like, this looked so realistic. There's a cat in this movie that looks fucking real in shots. Gorgeous movie. I mean, goes without saying, this is a technical achievement from start to finish. From the opening scene to the last shot, this is a beautiful film. It felt like it was compensating for a lack of a great story and great character beats by having a bunch of celebrity cameos and a lot of humor and great animation. It's felt like they leaned on that a little bit. So because of that, the animation is to a higher standard that I was expecting, even by Pixar standards. This is a exceptional looking movie. The shot composition is absolutely wonderful. The director did a really good job. So visually, this is like a 10. From a story standpoint, you've seen this all before, but where it ends up, the ending of this movie with all the hijinks, and the carnival's really fun. I actually wish there had been more of the carnival. There's so much of the antique store. I think they could have done more with the carnival. Basically, in the third act, what happens is the toys all kind of come together, and because we're older and the series is older, it's about like maybe in the last 10 minutes, okay, we're going to get the gang back together and pull this mission off. Because, you know, in 3, the whole movie, Woody's trying to save his friends from the daycare, and it's a prison escape movie. And Toy Story 2 is all about Woody's character development. This, in more ways than the sequels, goes back to the original film. This is more like the first film than the other two. But at the end, it's them kind of coming together with teamwork and camaraderie and pulling off this last mission with an RV and synchronizing everything to where they have to get the RV at this spot at this time so they can get this person to this place so they can meet up with Bonnie and get Forky back. And all of those things, it gets so fun in the last like 10-15 minutes that I forgot I had many issues with it. And the emotional beat this ends on with, I don't think will work for everybody. I think organically this is exactly where I wanted the movie to end, and the choice that Woody makes at the end of this movie I thought was great. Once again, it wasn't as emotional as the end of 3. I still found it very emotional, though. I thought it really had a hit home, and it made me think, wow, you could go on with this series and follow new characters now, because this honestly had more of a science fiction fantasy premise at the end, that the toys don't need kids, they don't need humans, that we're going to get films that exist with just the toys. Like there's that the Toy Story universe, the world that these films exist in, the toys might exist on their own. This felt more of like a follow-up to those short films that they had been making and less of a sequel to Toy Story 3. But overall, I mean, I still think this is I still think this is way better than Finding Dory. I think this is way better than Incredibles 2, even if it suffers from some of the issues those two movies have. This is a much better film, in my opinion. I think that the Toy Story characters and just the universe they've built, and I think introducing new characters was the wise decision in retrospect, because if we do get sequels from now on, we can follow the new characters, and it's time to move on. The movie, in a lot of ways, is about moving on and rethinking your decisions in life and where your life is, and ownership and creation. And I actually found this to be a very thematically deep movie, in a very funny movie. It's just sad from beginning to end, though. It's kind of got this sad, mature tone, and it being a Woody story makes it so focused that it loses some of its adventure appeal that the other films had, like when they go to the Pizza Planet. There's a lack of a scope here. They kept it surprisingly small, but it feels like a singular vision because of that, and it is one of the best movies of the summer because of that. And I have no problem giving Toy Story 4 an 8 out of 10, and I'm up for Toy Story 5. I think the series actually needs to continue on after this point, because I don't think this ending is a great definitive ending. I think there's more. And I would like to see a Buzz movie. You gave Woody all this, why don't we get a Buzz Lightyear movie where he's the focus of the story? So if you wanted to see it, check it out. Although it's already been out for a while and made $1 billion. And just leave your opinion in the comment section. What did you think about this movie? Did you like it? Did it compare to the other films, or you just hate the Toy Story franchise? For me personally, now that they have 4 movies that are good, it's really hard to argue against the merits of this franchise, just because it's been consistent now all these years. And I love these characters, I love this world, and this was a bit of a nostalgia fest. This was a little cheap. I'm not gonna act like it wasn't a little cheap, but it was just nice to go see a movie that was a movie. It didn't have to be a masterpiece. It was just nice to see a movie that had a story and characters and worked, and it was consistently engaging and had some really scary moments that I wasn't expecting. The stuff with the dummies was really fucking scary. And yeah, I love Woody. I love seeing Woody in this, and even Bo Peep, the animation, the way that she looks, the light. I mean, it's crazy. She actually looks like a toy. She looks like a doll. I don't know if it's porcelain or something, but you can see the detail like you never have before. This is such a leap in animation that I recommend it on that alone. If you're an animation buff, and I am big time, and I love 2D animation, and I hate that it kind of just went away once Toy Story. I mean, Toy Story was kind of the nail in the coffin. Even though they made stuff like Tarzan and Mulan after that, Toy Story was the kicked it off to where the future was. And I think that had to do with camera angles. That a 3D film has camera angles that 2D films can't accomplish the same way. It looks closer to a movie. And I think people like that more for some reason. I think kids started to respond to it. But if you're a fan of animation, this is well worth seeing. This is a beautiful, beautiful movie. And whatever it lacks in its writing, it sure makes up for in its presentation. Its presentation is really where it shines.